no enemy combatants. There's no more, enhanced interrogations. We'll close Gitmo. It's either a man-caused disaster or an overseas contingency operation. A war on terror no longer exists. Right?
Well, the sad fact of it is Clausewitz and Sun Tzu and all the great strategy writers of history have always said, if you don't know your enemy, you will lose. Here's the important thing about this change of lexicon, Sean. The enemy is radical Islam. It's not all Muslims. It's radical Islam, the personification of which is in Iran. And today you've got, the foreign minister of Iran and the foreign minister of the United States, Hillary Clinton, sitting down for cordial discussions in a room in The Hague under the auspices of what the Europeans are going to do to help in Afghanistan. Interestingly enough, there are some good things that we ought to be talking to the Iranians about. For example, 3 missing Americans, one of whom is a former FBI agent, and 2 females who are both Iranian and American, who have been missing over there or held incommunicado for some period of time now. Richard Holbrooke, interestingly enough, said he and the foreign minister, Mohammad Akhundzadeh, said that they were going to stay in touch with each other. When the press asked Akhundzadeh afterwards, he said, we had no conversations, no negotiations. Hillary Clinton was asked the same question in The Hague before she flew off to London to join Barack Obama, and she said, oh yeah, we've exchanged information about the 3 missing Americans. The reality of it is you've got what Barack Obama now calls the Islamic Republic of Iran, their words, not ours, and you've got David Petraeus testifying before the Senate Armed Services Committee yesterday that the threat of an Iranian nuclear weapon is very profound. And now you have the North Koreans who manufacture the launching systems for Iran testing a new intercontinental ballistic missile. Well, it is not a good scene.
Well, with all the massive spending and all the time we've spent discussing the economic issues in the country, the one area where they're going to have massive cuts is in national defense, Ollie. Now, that seems to me, softening the language, videos to Iran, what you just described, seems to me pre-9/11. Are we headed to pre-9/11? Are we there?
Well, in fact, you've now got Somali activists in the United States. These are jihadis recruiting young Americans in places like Minneapolis, taking them to Somalia. We know of at least 2 who've been killed. We now have a new video from a recruiter trying to pitch it back here so that more young Americans, just like the Goat Boy did in Afghanistan, the guy that we covered from War Stories, these guys are now actively recruiting again in the United States. Look at the reality of it is when you've got judges like the one here in the District of Columbia who's now ruled that there's a habeas corpus provision for detainees in Afghanistan, we've got a problem, and this administration doesn't appear to want to talk about it, and so instead we nationalize General Motors.
Oh, good point. Let me read to you from Benjamin Netanyahu, the new Israeli prime minister. He said, you don't want a messianic, apocalyptic, cult-controlling atomic bombs. When the wide-eyed believer gets a hold of the reins of power and weapons of mass death, the entire world should start worrying. That's what's happening in Iran. If it will hinge on history. If Western civilization fails, if we'll allow them to get nuclear weapons. And then he went a step further to the United States. Obama, if you don't stop them from getting them, I will. And I don't blame them if they do based on the direct threats against Israel. Is that what's...
No, in fact, Tel Aviv is target number 1 for an Iranian nuclear weapon and could well be target number 1 for a Pakistani loose nuke that got in the hands of the wrong people. So they ought to be very concerned. Israel is literally on ground zero for their first nuke. And I would not be at all surprised if over the course of the next several months, if this administration doesn't get the Europeans, the Russians, the Chinese, and others to stand up and impose serious sanctions on Iran, that the Israelis will act because they know that the Russians are going to sell those SA-300 missile systems, making an attack almost impossible. If that stuff's on the way, the Israelis are going to have to strike.
Let me take, Colonel, I would be shocked if something doesn't happen as Iran still defies the world and still continues that pursuit. I don't think Israel has any choice because, you know what? They keep saying they're going to wipe them off the map. How many times do they get to say it and then we don't believe it? Good to see you, Colonel.
Well, they've said never again. I believe that.
Yeah. Safe home.